Welcome to the PharmaSource podcast, recorded on stage at CDMO Live Europe 2026 in Rotterdam. This episode is sponsored by PharmaBlock, a fully integrated CRDMO providing research, development and manufacturing services from early discovery to commercial production. We often hear that traditional procurement processes risk treating CDMOs as interchangeable. It can, at worst, drive aggressive price negotiations and incentivize partners to cherry-pick the high-margin products while avoiding complex and low-margin SKUs. Luckily, none of the people on this panel are what I would call traditional. In this session, we're going to explore how to negotiate contracts with win-win outcomes for the benefit of both parties. So firstly, we've got Matt Holt, Managing Director of Collaborative Sourcing, who is going to be chairing this conversation. We've got Salomon Engels, we're doing it like this, Head of External Manufacturing for Par Health. Thomas, please, Director of Partnerships and Procurement for Leyden Labs, very, very exciting biotech in the Netherlands. And Mark Goemans, Chief Commercial Officer for Bora Biologics. And thank you to Bora for sponsoring this session as well. Matt, over to you.
Thank you very much, Luke. Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. We realise that we're what's standing between you and happy hour, so we'll try and be as efficient as possible. But this really should be a fascinating session following on from the last one, which explored price. We're going to be looking at all the other factors that are super important both to pharma companies and to CDMOs. So it's a really great honour to be with you and the great panel that I share the stage with right now. Before we dive in, we'll do some introductions. So Salomon, why don't you go first?
Sure.
And we'll work our way down the panel.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Salomon Engels. I'm Head of External Manufacturing for Par Health, which is a spin-off from the Mallinckrodt-Endo merger last year. Par Health is a pharma company. We supply generics, specialty generics, essential generics, injectables and APIs. I oversee the supplier networks of CDMOs, CDMO Performance and Partnerships. My background is diverse. I was born in Venezuela, South America. So some of my CDMOs here, we negotiate in Spanish, if you're out there. Good for you, Ola. My parents are Dutch, and I lived in 5 different countries. My background is, and what I bring to the table is 20 years of experience in supply chain, sourcing in FMCG, pharma, healthcare, and retail. So nice to be here.
Thanks. Mark,
Yes.
please.
My name is Mark Goemans. I'm Chief Commercial Officer of Bora Biologics, part of the Bora Group. The Bora Group is a broad CDMO ranging from OSD ointments, derms, but also drug substance biologics and steriles in drug product. I have some 25 years of experience in CDMOs, at various CDMOs. I'm a Dutch national. I've traveled to a lot of countries, but my parents are fully Dutch. And by the way, I lived for quite a few years in Rotterdam, so it feels like coming home.
Fantastic. Thanks, Mark.
Yeah.
Thomas?
My name is Thomas Thunnissen. I'm the Director of Procurement and Partnerships at Leyden Labs, a Dutch biotech company developing a nasal spray, an antibody delivered nasally, which should protect against respiratory viruses, infectious diseases, so influenza, COVID. Pretty much responsible for supporting mostly R&D and CMC, of course, as well, in finding the right partners. Worked in the industry for 15 years, always within R&D, procurement, and CMC procurement. Nice to meet you.
Thanks, everyone. And just finally, I'm Matthew Holt. I'm the co-founder of Collaborative Sourcing. We are a procurement consultancy dedicated to the pharmaceutical industry. We help a range of clients with procurement solutions, but with a real focus around that collaboration. And prior to that, I've been 15 or so years in pharmaceutical procurement. And on that, I think just to kick us off then, we're going to take this panel through the kind of beginning parts of building those relationships all the way through to the management of them later on. But to begin with, the early negotiations are always an interesting time. When I was first learning procurement, I don't know about you, Solomon, as well, maybe you're always taught the very traditional sort of transactional price negotiations, the tough negotiating styles. But for the pharma industry in particular, but with CDMOs in particular, you are often dealing with very complex sourcing requirements, and price is only one factor, as we all know. But how you lead into that negotiation, you send signals, don't you, in going to the table for the first time. And I wonder, Solomon, from your experience, how can you start those negotiations off on the right footing, maybe where price is one of many factors that you're going to be interested in?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Price is not the main factor, except if you work in generics, where obviously it's very price sensitive, the margins are very slim. Price is just one element of the negotiation. When you look at a deal, when I look at a deal, is what value are we adding? What value is this to us as a company, as a sponsor, if you will, and what value is it for the business? You know, how are we creating this partnership? I don't believe in transactional relationship. Those exist, obviously, in the, you know, if you buy commodities, indirect sourcing, works quite well. In the CDMO world, we are an ecosystem, right? We work together, and it's maximizing the value. So not only a win-win, it's a win more concept. How can you maximize? We invest in your facility, if we can, right, if it makes sense, but also how can we grow? How can we invest in additional lines? Or so it's more like bringing the level up from a price discussion. Price is important, but it's what value are we bringing to the table? And how do we add value to each other in the supply network?
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Thomas, if I can come to you next, if that's all right. Maybe as part of your answer, you explain a little bit about Leyden Labs as well. That would be, I think, really helpful. For smaller biotechs and early stage companies, costs are a constraint, of course, and pricing is important. What other elements are you evaluating when you're searching for and selecting CDMOs?
Yeah, good question. And obviously, looking at the audience, I will of course say that price is very important. But I agree with Salomon. It's one of the many items, right? I think we all remember that one project where we were too much focused on cost, and that project ended up quite costly. I think one thing for smaller companies like us with no revenue, you would say that cost is definitely constrained, and obviously we'll be looking at that sharply. But I think for us also, speed, flexibility, popular words like agility, I think, are very, very important, especially for companies like us, where we cannot really look into the future too far ahead. And where time is obviously also money. So having a CMO, a partner that can be a little bit the sailboat that a biotech needs to be, I think will come a long way in evaluating the right partners. Yeah,
that's a nice way of putting it. Mark, then coming to you, obviously you're coming out from the other side of the table, if you like, from a CDMO. When a company comes to you with an opportunity, what are the signals or what are the factors that you're looking for that actually get you genuinely interested in that project, and what makes you kind of maybe more nervous or maybe wanting to back away a little bit?
Well, to build on Thomas, I'm a sailor, so I really like the parallel you give on sailing and the flexibility. I think one of the first points is the transparency on the issues you have. So what are the flexibilities you're looking for? That's super helpful. And phrasing the initial question can sometimes be tough. So I often say that, certainly towards smaller biotechs, but the CDMOs are the manufacturing experts. And that, I think, is sometimes forgotten, as COVID showed that. They were able to basically stand up to the challenge. The other one is also commitment. So the commitment of the prospective client, but also skin in the game. So when there's an opportunity maybe to benefit both from it, and sometimes also to co-invest. So those for me are the positive signals. I will leave it with the negative ones, which is sort of mirror. Yep.
Fair enough. No, I get a real sense from everybody, really. And I think it's certainly what I see and we see in our work is that genuine interest and one, working with parties who do have that kind of genuine ambition to match yours as well and to grow with you. I think it can often be overlooked and think that everyone's just playing for price or playing for the same, targets all the time. Actually, people genuinely are interested. I think that's always great. Just before we actually move on to the next part, sticking on negotiation for a second, we've actually got a nice coincidence with the panel that we have on the stage today, because two of them actually negotiated quite a significant and complex deal a number of years ago. Now, we don't want to necessarily go into the fine details of that, but I wonder if either of you wanted, or both of you wanted to share maybe some of your experience, what worked well, and try to be complimentary, I guess. But yeah, what worked well from that experience?
Salomon was shopping, and I was at the CMO. By the way, I walked into a negotiation that basically was stalled. But maybe you can set the framework sort of what you were looking for.
Yes, a very complex project. At the end, we got a deal, which is the main point, right? Yeah. I think it was value was $100 million, maybe deal. So very tough negotiation, took months. It was during COVID, so both of us were at different companies. You stepped into the negotiation as an outsider. We had a negotiation that didn't go well with the previous parties, so you came in.
On our end, right?
On your end, yeah. On our end, we were still the same. And at the end, I think it was more the willingness to do business that sort of moved the needle, and the clauses that we were able to agree.
Yes, and you really had to remind me even at the door here what happened. But so one of the issues was really stuck, and basically going head to head. And one of the things that I use, I think there are a few elements, but basically who can best carry the risk. So and not everything's important to everyone, but I think also to sometimes reciprocate an argument. So and you told me that on a bonus malus approach, it's like, okay, don't remember you were looking for penalties on late delivery. I said, okay, so what do I get if I overperform? Yeah. And then of course it's about the metrics and sort of and capping that, because everybody was getting uncertain. It's like, hey, what are you doing, Mark? And Andrea, by the way. And that landed the deal. So, I thought it was funny. Initially, we were pretty stuck in sort of repeating initial arguments until we really found new ways to approach it.
Yeah, and we understood our positions as well, right? What the site needed as well from a CapEx investment and what the product required specifically. So we were able to frame a negotiation around that, and the bonus malus concept was actually very fair. At the end, we ended up with a really, fair agreement, which worked for both at the time.
And by the way, I used it later on as well, and caught some people by surprise. So
yeah. Bonus malus concept. Google it if you don't know it.
Yeah,
brilliant.
Yeah,
it's great because not only does it show that this industry is small and people do move around and you meet people again, in different roles, but that also the creativity that you or your teams show to unlock what would have been a complex situation and a lot of pressure, and actually that creativity and working together was in the end the answer.
Well, and I think I left the business to move on to other fields, but it's also the maintenance of the agreement. I remember my first deal I closed. I walked into the office of my boss. I said, Carlo, I closed the deal, and so I said, it only starts now. Mm-hmm. So it's also basically doing the maintenance on the deal, make sure that what you agreed back then is still suitable going forward, either on the CDMO side or on the client side. Mm-hmm. Because one thing is that things change. Mm-hmm. Forecasts go up, go down, and then suddenly things become sort of derailed. Yeah. And then you need to build that trust in the negotiation, I think.
So actually then that brings us on nicely to the next sort of stage in that life cycle is actually putting those negotiations down into contracts. And obviously contracts can be arduous and stressful to put together. They can serve several purposes, though, and I think something that I think we all would agree on is not just about making sure that we mitigate risk or protect each other's information or finances, but actually how can we best build contracts that actually promote growth and promote that win-win philosophy. So I wonder, maybe Mark, I'll come back to you first of all. When perhaps you're provided with a first draft of a contract from a client, are there particular things that you're looking for, would like to see, that would signal to you that yes, they are genuine about a partnership, as opposed to it was nice warm words during the negotiation, but now it's maybe a bit more transactional? Is there anything that we would like to see?
Yeah, for sure. And I think initially when you see the first draft is basically start asking a lot of questions before judging. So we really be careful sort of responding too quickly on it. But again, you're looking for the flexibility on the terms, what people mean, and how they fit with you. But some examples, I mean, probably it's an evergreen, it's like IP. So the moment when there are very square IP rights and there's no room basically for the CDMO to learn, that's a signal. But also on very rigid forecasting mechanisms, or not wanting to own swings up and down because you know they're going to happen. That's basically where you need to dance in a way. So those to me are typical issues. For instance, specifications. I always say the specification clearly need boundaries, but also in manufacturing you need some space. And I remember that recently a biotech commenting that their initial manufacturing was too consistent. And it might be a future burden on registration because they basically wanted a little bit more movement around the specifications. And I think that's where you also spot both the intent but also the experience of the team.
Mm. Yeah. And I guess then, Salomon, just coming to you, as you described already, one of the contracts that you were in negotiation for, but I know from speaking to you previously, you've set up contracts for various things from R&D through commercial and all across the life sciences sector. Are there any kind of non-negotiables that you would be looking for to really pin down in contracts coming from the point of view of procurement and that future commercial?
Yeah. There are. Obviously, commercial terms are, there's very standard terms. I think going back to what Mark said before I answer, scope is really important, right? If you have the scope wrong at the start, and that's why it's important to bring in tech ops and quality. I know quality in the previous section the table was really small, but you need to bring quality tech ops, the SMEs along, to scope out the project. Because if you start a business with an incorrect scope, you get scope creeps, you get cost increases that may even drive the product not being financially viable, right? Going back to the terms, so yeah, non-negotiables. As a customer, we don't like take or pays or minimum volume commitments. I think Can, Fabian, and Clarita mentioned it this morning during the opening as well, and that resonates a lot with me. There are terms of liability. Mark mentioned as well, liability in the contracts. Who owns what liability? IP is important. Non-negotiables, I think, for me, are delivery terms. So we want to hold our suppliers accountable, and we're mutually accountable as well, but it has to be a level of accountability from a delivery perspective. We pay you X price for your service, but we expect something back, which is service, reliable service, supply, continue to supply service, right, and partnership. Okay, it's not transactional, it's partnership. So non-negotiables, I think, is the limitation of liability language. It's the minimum volume commitments, take or pays, which are, for me, that's a turn-off immediately. However, there's alternatives. You can actually change commitments to reserve capacity, right? Or co-invest in CapEx and equipment, which is slightly different than, I'll pay you X amount for volumes that may not materialize, especially in R&D to commercial phase. So the product is not FDA approved or EMA approved, you don't have certainty of supply. So who shares the risk, right? So the non-negotiables are just to protect the business.
Yeah, and actually that leads nicely to Thomas. If I bring you in here, we were talking earlier, weren't we, about the commitments that you're able to make as a smaller startup company or early stage developer, your risk is greater in those respects.
Yeah.
Maybe tell us a little bit about how you see that difference, maybe with commercial, but those horizons are a bit more difficult to see, aren't they?
Yeah. No, I think obviously there's a lot of uncertainty, and being a startup or scale-up biotech like us with no revenue, it's going to be very difficult to commit long-term. We can't guarantee success to our investors. We are not throwing out permanent contracts to employees. And the same goes for your partners. We cannot, it's very difficult to really do a long-term commitment contractually. So I guess building certainty and building trust is more from a non-contractual perspective. And I think that's what you mentioned earlier, Mark. I think that's where really transparency and openness comes in. And I think as a sponsor, as a biopharmaceutical company, I think towards CMOs, I think there are still some steps to do in terms of being more transparent in what your needs are. But really contractual long-term commitments is kind of a no-go if you don't really have a long runway. But building a sustainable partnership, I think if it comes down to manufacturing, it's the number one category where biopharmaceutical companies will think twice of changing a partner. So I think having that open dialogue and that transparency and trust will probably be the enabler that gives that amount of certainty towards the CMO partner. But contractually, it's definitely in those early stages very difficult. Yeah.
Mark, I wonder if I could just maybe get you to touch on that point, because it's a big distinction, isn't it, between, maybe for a CDMO, something that is maybe a little bit more predictable on one hand, but something like Thomas has described, which is a very difficult to predict and highly risky commitment, with a lack of less of a commitment. How does a CDMO kind of tackle that, and how would you see it?
Yeah, that's a very interesting element of CDMO, because certainly in the early stages, you cannot guarantee a result. And the first time I saw an agreement, it's like we have basically commitment to spend time, but not on the result. And some purchasers find it a very hard concept. In the end, I think it's about staying connected. So the moment basically the agreement moves from the negotiation table, it's handed to the people to execute. I think sometimes both sides forget basically that also needs maintenance, so that you need to make sure there is a frequent connection about what's going on. And both in the labs, but for instance in manufacturing these days, personal implants are very common and allows you basically to have eyes on what's happening. Because when something goes quote unquote wrong or doesn't get the result that you want, often it's okay, who made a mistake here? But sometimes it's much more important, basically you can rewind what happened.
Yeah.
And then, so basically pulling in your customer inside the CDMO and allowing them to witness what's going on and be part. It cannot be that they're running the plant or the lab or whatever. Certainly in the plant that is subject to the local regulations, that is really helpful. And then it allows you to steer. And in early stage development trajectories, there's a lot to be discovered in basically creating that process to manufacture the molecule.
No.
So you've also started then to touch on sort of governance then. So actually from the contract stage, and maybe it's part of the contract, actually defining some of that future governance. So, but when it comes to governance, obviously that's when you turn the paper in the contract into reality in the day-to-day operations, and that communication, how frequently that communication is required, what objectives are trying to be met by both parties, how they're going to be measured, and so on. Maybe, Salomon, if I start with you, in terms of governance and how you will aim to build this win-win alliance with this CDMO, what sort of governance are you expecting to be able to implement from a sort of day-to-day operational level?
Yeah. First of all, I think you need to understand who you have in your network. You need to understand the CMOs, you need to understand the products, the product families, the value of each product, right? So what I do is I do a vendor segmentation to start with, see who do we have in our network, who are the good guys, the bad guys, the ones that we can improve and bring to a next level, and then tailor a supplier relationship management and SRM program around that, around the outcome of that segmentation. Not every CMO requires a weekly call. Not every CMO requires a top management interaction. So let's see what we have. Okay, let's say tier one, the top suppliers, the highest revenue drivers, will have different needs of interaction. What I say, and I know there's different tools out there, like Gartner, for example, they have different SRM program tools. They use a pyramid, right? So the pyramid, so the top is sort of the CEO, and at the bottom is more the tactical, operational interaction. I'd say structure your program, governance program systematically, but also where it makes sense, right? Focus on the big fish, right? Focus on the ones that are driving value. Some people, and also how you allocate as a leader your resources within your teams, because sometimes you have resources allocated to vendors that don't add any value, while you can actually maximize the value of the ones that actually deliver. So I do that, vendor segmentation, SRM program, and then you have the different level of meetings, the weekly supply operations meetings, POs, deliveries, etc. Then you have the sort of the business review meetings on a monthly or quarterly basis. You can have your joint steering committees or steering groups, however you call it, and then having that CEO to CEO connection. It really helps. Again, it's tailored, and if your supply chain is your supply chain, you know better, what you have, but you need to understand what you have.
Yeah. And Thomas, maybe from your perspective, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you're focusing very much on early stage and clinical development, there may be less of that, certainly over the longer term, less of that day-to-day interaction, and maybe more focused on very specific events. And then you might not speak to them for a bit longer, and then you come back. And is that something you find difficult, or is that a different problem to manage, really? Sorry, to Thomas, sorry.
I think so. I think what Salomon said around supplier segmentation, I think that's very important. Focus on what really matters and prioritize. That's what we do as well. Obviously, within a smaller company, you don't have those fancy policies and processes and templates, but definitely we do look at segmentation, and obviously that means that your CMOs are obviously CMCs at the heart of your organization. I mean, that's in the end what ends up in a human body, right? So we have routinely contact, obviously on project level, but also on a higher level, on business development, on quality, obviously operations as well. And a very direct line. We tend to say to our children, do not pick up your phone, but I would encourage every sponsor to pick up the phone instead of another email, right? So I think that very close communication, open communication lines are generally very important to have. And obviously a more formal governance model is something that we've implemented as well. For sure.
It's something that often can kind of ebb away over time, isn't it? We found some organizations, they start with a great governance structure, and over time another fire needs to be put out somewhere, so they skip a meeting, or it gets pushed back, or someone can't be available. So it's those sorts of problems can occur. Salomon, how do you ensure that is maintained and is always to avoid that kind of rush at the end for a quick meeting, or there's a problem, so now we've got to step in and solve it. How do you maintain that?
So first of all, I think setting expectations. You know, when you onboard a new supplier, for example, right? You set the expectations from the start, saying, "Hey, we expect to have a reciprocal team on your end. You know, a project management lead, for example, or a supply chain lead on both sides." Often we put it in contracts. So we have the meeting interactions written in a contract, say, you know, weekly meetings, bi-weekly, monthly, quarterly, depending on the needs. And then it's also a performance, based management, right? So obviously you don't just sign a contract. And by the way, the BD sales teams, they're really, really good. Kudos to all the sales guys here. You do a great job selling, but then the people executing, that's sometimes another story, right? So we have to ensure that the gap, and Mark mentioned as well, the gap is closed between what is being contracted, right? It's in paper. In the earlier sessions, someone said that, you know, you sign the agreement, you put it on the shelf, right, or in the shelf. So that's exactly it. You only pull it out when you have an issue, you know, when actually, you know, the legal team sort of almost get involved. But I think it's staying close to your network. If it depends again on the tier of relationship, build that relationship. For me, business is about people, right? It's about relationship. When I sign a deal, I prefer to work with someone I know, that I trust, right? Trust is key. It was mentioned as well. But also the maintenance of that relationship is very important. So put in the contract and then ensure that your teams are also aware of what's in the contract, saying, guys, this is the expectation, PM, this is your expectation, supply chain, quality tech ops. So it's about setting expectations and just hold each other accountable.
Yeah, and Mark, for you, you know, it's lovely having a contract with a great governance structure and it's working and everything's fine. But when those things do go wrong, or when there is no governance structure in the first place, perhaps with a sponsor, what's the impact for you as a CDMO? Is it difficult then to escalate when there are issues, or how does it affect you?
Escalation is really easy because you take the first name and the last name of the CEO and you send him an email with capitals, right? So that's usually a sign it doesn't work. So I think the important part is that you explain to the team what the purpose is of this structure. That's in every agreement. And even if they executed what the purpose is to build trust, right? And I remember one of my junior a project manager, and he made a great career. He says, Mark, why? I told him to call the client every week. And he said, why should I do it? I said, well, during your 6th call, you have something to say that you're not very happy about. But at least 5 times you spoke about something else, and then there is a level of trust. So what happens if you lose trust? And you described it nicely with exchanging emails instead of picking up the phone, you start losing time, start losing solutions, and then the worst thing that happens is that you're assigning the wrong people to the problem. And so you're also starting to losing talent. So basically it's about trust, time, and talent that are basically the issues when it really goes south.
Yeah. The final sort of part that we're just going to touch on topic when we're thinking about building alliances beyond the price, and a really key one right now, I think it's been spoken about a lot today, is risk, and how risk is managed in partnerships and between partners. Obviously risk comes in many forms, financial and geopolitical and quality and everything else, but managing that risk between you so it's appropriate for both parties is obviously very complex and something that needs to be worked on. Maybe if I come to you first, Thomas, in terms of risk and how you would ideally manage risk with a partner, what would be the sort of go-tos or the key themes for you?
Yeah, I mean, the risk of a company like ours that is VC-backed is pretty much making sure that you meet the next value inflection point. So for us, that's our main focus. And I think in terms of risk with regards to your CMO, I mean, for us, what is most important is assurance of supply, timely assurance of supply. So having that reliability is of huge importance, and speed, because that's, I think for us it's very much also about speed, making sure that you have your cell line developed quickly enough, making sure that you have your resupply quick enough, so capacity, preferably short term, if possible at all. Those are things that are very important to us, and risks that we need to address up front and quite early on already. So definitely something we are looking ahead already. Yeah.
And Salomon, perhaps coming to you next. As you've already described, obviously you're dealing with a large number of different CMOs and mostly commercial phases as well. The risks there around supply disruption, or financial risk and so on, are very big. How do you see the role of those partnerships and how they can help you to manage risk, but also that it's done fairly, I guess?
Sharing risk contractually or operationally?
Yeah, or both, yeah.
I think the sharing of risk is essential if you want to look beyond transactional relationship and more work towards a partnership, right? It's you both, win sort of if the product is a success. Why not sharing the risks at the same time? When you have a partnership, you come to the table with different assets, right? Different needs, different backgrounds, but essentially what you're trying to do is create something unique, right? Unique, maybe a molecule into a device, and there is an element of risk. Like I said earlier, if the product is not approved, regulatory approved, there is a risk, inherent risk. How do you manage that? If the CMO, just to stand on your side now, Mark, if the CDMO is looking to invest capital into a site, who shares that risk? Because sometimes we're the first customer on that line, a particular line, or we trigger the PAI inspection for the first time, right? So it's like, how do we share that risk? There's different models. But sharing is essential. There's different models. We won't go into detail here, but essentially is making sure that the risks are known, okay? Are flagged early on, that our senior executive leadership is aware of the risks and that the CMO is aware of the risk, and then say, how do we manage this? And put something, again, in the framework of an MSA that works for both.
Yeah, perfect. And for you, Mark, I assume you get asked to share risk from your clients. What to you would make sense in terms of what level of risk you're prepared to offer, and then what you think is fair?
What is fair? I think you should make sure that risks and so on are directionally right. So, for instance, a CDMO generally can show flexibility in capacity and so on. But again, and then I'm repeating it, is so there's a downward but also an upward risk, right? And the upward risk is nicer than the downward one. So if you find common ground and basically sort of when things go better, there's also a benefit of doing that, then also the reverse side of risk is also there, because basically CDMO is also there in the game. And the upside for the biotech is often larger because basically we're limited at cost. So if you can add something there, then it becomes an easier conversation, and you need to find out basically what the ranges are that the customer is looking for. So yeah, and so for instance, another element is also about for instance, clients ultimately are always looking to save cost. Why would a CDMO save cost if there's no benefit for them either? So if you can incentivize that you have a sharing there, then it becomes interesting for the CDMO to run down that path. So I've seen very rigid approaches there, which in the end fell flat. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're going to have a couple of minutes to answer some questions from the audience if there are any. But just before we do that, I wonder if I could come to each of you just with a little quick little tip or a little helpful kind of thing that you could share with with the audience for how you would go about, one step that you would use to go about building that really strong partnership with a new CDMO or with a new sponsor. So Salomon, if I
yes, sure.
First, if I
yeah,
moment.
that's fine. Yeah, I think again, we are part of an ecosystem, right? We need each other, right? I don't think we can deliver a product by ourselves unless you're fully integrated, which most of us are not. That's why we are partnered with CDMOs. Be fair in your expectations, okay? Price-wise as well. Understand your market, understand your target. Understand how many products are in the market for that molecule. For example, set the pricing expectations right. If it's a generic company, don't come in with a biologics price structure. It won't work, right? So it's understanding your market, understand the product, understand your customer. And the best advice I can give you is build the relationships with your customers and with your partners. Socially as well, it's not always business. It's a small industry, so today we're here, tomorrow we're somewhere else, but we can always build businesses together and find ideas. Continuous improvement is another thing, maybe. So my last point: push for continuous improvement. Challenge your suppliers, your CDMOs, and challenge your customers as well in terms of come up with continuous improvement initiatives that may bring efficiencies, cost savings, which you can eventually share in a share risk, share benefit model. But be innovative. Go the next step. Don't just settle for, we're building this line just to fill, for example, vials. Everyone is doing that. How do you differentiate yourself from your competition? And that's the partnership. That's the relationship, the service that often it's more than transactional. It's the added value.
Perfect. Thank you, Salomon. Mark, I'll come to you next.
Yeah. So I think two blood types meet. One is the product expert, the one is the manufacturing expert. And I think they should spend more time basically asking questions back and forth. So where the CDMO knows a lot about manufacturing, the biotech knows a lot about the product. And I think, and it's not only about today, it's also about tomorrow, because a lot of choices that you're making, you need to reflect into the future, and are they basically robust enough to endure the future. So I think what I said initially with the transparency, including the sort of the insecurities you have about what you don't know, you can make different choices. And I think that basically the more questions you ask up front, the better the solutions are, and the solutions are not perfect. So you should also be ready to revise that agreement as you go forward through good governance. I think that wraps it.
Brilliant. Thank you, Mark. Thomas, final point.
Yeah, I mean, transparency, I think, so I think opening up, being very clear on your expectations, and I do want to mention there that I think biopharmaceutical industry, so the client can do a bit more on that. So I think that's very important. I think also revisiting your initial expectations periodically. So why did you enter into that partnership? And be very explicit about it and address it very explicitly is, I think, also key to, sometimes we forget it and we enter into another governance meetings where we go through that fixed agenda, our projects, continuous improvement and innovation. It is all very important, and definitely don't want to put it down, but I think just visiting that initial expectation on why did we enter into this partnership is very important.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, guys. I think we have a pretty broad consensus on what makes a partnership work really well, beyond price. I think that's been the objective. A couple of themes that came up: trust and transparency, particularly of importance. That's something that we bang on about quite a lot, so I'm really glad that they came up. We have, I think, as you can probably hear outside, just ran out of time, so there won't be any time for questions, but thanks ever so much to the panel, to Thomas, to Mark, to Salomon. Thank you very much. And to you guys for listening. I hope it's been informative. Hopefully you'll see us, if you did want to ask any questions, you'll probably see us either later on this evening or tomorrow to come and ask. But yeah, thank you very much to you guys.
Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.